This is most certainly not how I wanted to start this channel, but it seems clear that the rewired soul needs to be stopped. And there are some amazing videos, and I'm very thankful for those, that educated me on the issues with Chris, though, as I'll get into shortly, there are some perspectives that I have that I don't think have been added to the conversation yet, and I hope can help, provide further ammunition as to why he is extremely dangerous and manipulative and should not be listened to for any reason. So, without any further ado, this is V, my trusty sidekick. You can just call me S. And I am a disabled psychotherapist and have, due to multiple physical chronic illnesses, though I also have a history of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which has become a major point of contention with Chris when it comes to Leif. And just as a heads up, Leif is 100% on point, and it matches with all the current research and evidence, and I'll get into that too. So, to start, just to give my background and credentials in brief, I am a master's level mental health professional qualified to do psychotherapy, and I worked in the field for 8 years as a therapist, longer in the field overall when it comes to mental health. And I actually did postgraduate special certifications in trauma, as well as other evidence-based practices. And I essentially worked in wraparound mobile treatment for people who needed long-term wraparound services. So I would meet with people in their homes or wherever they needed to be seen. I would be there during crisis, see people in the hospital. I worked on an interdisciplinary team with a lot of other professionals. So, I have quite a bit of experience on this, and I did 52 hours of credits just for trauma-informed therapy, and also have training background in DBT and mindfulness, Chris's weapon of choice. So yeah, I'm gonna spill the tea on why he doesn't actually practice what he preaches and why it's all a bunch of manipulation. So first, how does Chris get away with calling himself a mental health professional? So here's the secret, and this is something that you don't really know unless you work in the industry. So there's different levels of mental health professionals. So you have like your psychiatrists and PhD psychologists. Then you have the next rung down, the psychotherapist counselors like me who have master's level training. And then there's a whole variety of other types of professionals. The next major type is substance abuse counselors, and they have a variety of different types of degree structures and certification. And then there are actually some amazing types of mental health professionals that may only have a high school education but have some special certifications just in mental health. The main form of this is actually usually peer counselors, which are people who have a history of mental health issues themselves, who then go on to use their personal experiences along with some training and on-the-job experience on how to counsel people and help them in their recovery. So what is Chris exactly? So Chris, based on what he has said, has worked as a professional, in quotes, for some substance abuse centers, and in that process he also became qualified to teach courses on mindfulness. So he may have an actual certification in that. Since V's gone, I'm going to remove the toy from my ear. So due to that, he can call himself a professional sneakily. However, unless you are licensed and have a degree level that qualifies you to diagnose someone, you can't diagnose someone. Even with my degree level, you have to have a certain license to be able to diagnose. Like, I actually purposefully didn't get my next level license so I could diagnose because I loved my job and I didn't want to get promoted. So technically, I was only able to form diagnostic impressions. So, I would, do my assessments and then run that past our psychiatrist or program manager or someone else on the team who was able to render a diagnosis, and then, take it from there. But if I had wanted to, and I certainly had the experience to do so, I could have taken the test to sit for the next level of licensure where I could independently diagnose patients. So that's some inside info on how he gets away with this. So the next real important topic is how he fooled me and fools so many other people. So mindfulness in particular is a very well-researched and respected evidence-based practice for mental health. It's kind of the buzzword everywhere, to the fact that it's infiltrated pop culture. It's why adult coloring is so popular. So, when you have some background and are allowed to teach courses in mindfulness, then you know all of these buzzwords that make you sound like you are on the right side of things and know what you're talking about. And then in addition to that, he probably has some other evidence-based background with the substance abuse centers he worked for. Not to mention his mother, who, by the way, based on deep dives that I'm aware of, actually isn't licensed as a therapist. She's only licensed as an educator. So once again, you have somebody who knows all the buzzwords to throw around. So it sounds real good on the surface. He knows the words to say, and I believe he even knows what they mean, but he uses them inappropriately and uses them for manipulation. So for a mental health professional who is qualified to diagnose, even me, who currently, because I am disabled and don't hold my license, because there's no need to for right now for me to do so, we aren't ethically allowed to diagnose anyone that we are not currently treating. And in fact, in most states, you have to do your assessments face-to-face with someone. So just as, a segue, that's kind of how all the BetterHelp stuff is scammy, because, they can't do a lot of the services a therapist can do because you just aren't allowed to do that remotely. You usually have to see the person. So yeah, it's completely unethical to even insinuate what might be going on with someone. I may even in the future, have some videos where I might point out, certain behaviors and, completely separate from the person, discuss that how it could relate to somebody, and make it very, very, very clear I'm not making any assumptions about that person at all. In no way is it me trying to diagnose or say what that person needs. But it's completely unethical. And this is why there's the streaming video that he did being sent about, with him just cackling about how because he isn't licensed he can say whatever he wants, and in a way that's true. So yeah, it's gone completely overboard and to the point where it's harming people directly. And what I have seen happen to Leif is just astoundingly horrific. It hits me to my core, not just as a therapist, but as a survivor and somebody who has done a lot of the recovery process for complex post-traumatic stress disorder. It is just so inappropriate, which leads to the next thing, and that is weaponizing trauma by calling it borderline personality disorder. So, trauma is an interesting thing when it comes to treatment and culture, and one of the first books to really start to delve into what's become our current therapeutic model for trauma, called Trauma and Recovery. In the preface, it says that, trauma is the one thing society likes to repeatedly forget because it can't hold on to the devastation that humanity can cause. That's not an exact quote, but that's the spirit of it. And, this has led to ongoing issues with the DSM and just, the ICD and all these other resources for how we actually diagnose people. And yes, borderline personality disorder directly came out of the diagnosis of hysteria. And a brief little tidbit on that, the only paper Freud ever had to retract was one called The Etiology of Hysteria, where he discussed that hysteria is 100% caused by trauma. It is a perfect logical response to things that people have survived, and that it is 100% treatable by addressing the trauma. And it's not that there's anything wrong with the person with hysteria, it's that there's something wrong with the people around them and the world around them. And when you give them the tools to essentially, right the ship around them and, develop the skills that they should have had and were entitled to by the people around them when they were growing up, that this all goes away. And, because this meant that, all of these, children of, aristocrats and, rich people in general, who were being, sat on the couch of, Freud and his colleagues, that this meant that they were being abused by these very well-regarded rich people. The entire psychodynamic community just rebelled against Freud, and he actually retracted the paper because of this, like pretty much under duress, and it pretty much crushed like his career forever. That paper is still available in any complete book by Freud with all of his papers. It's in there. You can probably Google it online. I can see if I can get a link, but it's very interesting. And borderline personality disorder, yes, is a direct extension and the new name for hysteria. And it is the representation of not justifying and empowering people with recognizing the trauma that caused, these things to manifest in the individual, but instead to blame the individual and make them the source of their own problem. And guess what? When you treat trauma as borderline personality disorder, it's not as successful as treating it as complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And complex post-traumatic stress disorder isn't new. That diagnosis actually goes back to the mid to late 90s. I was actually very, very lucky, and when I was in treatment, I even though my therapist didn't have the models available today that really helped successfully treat trauma, they were aware of the diagnosis. So I was very lucky and dodged the borderline personality bullet, and instead was diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder with, depression and a host of other things going along with that. And it was a huge deal politically that CPTSD didn't make it into the DSM-5. A lot of my colleagues were actually at the, meetings, like trying to advocate for it to be included. And originally, a lot of the personality disorders were supposed to be completely scratched. Borderline personality disorder at most was supposed to be moved over into the mood disorders as affect regulation disorder. And instead, no, we just stuck with what we have. And in reality today, trauma-informed care has been an evolving model since, the late 90s, early 2000s. It's now well established. There's tons of research supporting it. It is one of the SAMHSA recommended evidence-based practices. It is what's considered up to date. And in this model, borderline personality disorder doesn't exist. Sometimes still as clinicians, we'll have to still use that diagnosis as a placeholder, since without CPTSD being recognized as a diagnosis, we aren't able to code for the full, host of services. So, that's the background. Leif's opinions aren't just her opinions, they are 100% right. That is what the psychology community views as being, the correct path in terms of trauma, and borderline personality disorder being viewed as defunct and not a worthwhile diagnosis. And I'll put all the links on the description showing that's the truth. So that also sheds a lot of light on Chris. And, mindfulness kind of gets away with still holding on to borderline, because while the trauma-informed care revolution was still kind of taking off, that was also when DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, was first being developed as a model for borderline personality disorder, and mindfulness is one of the core parts of that form of treatment. So what's interesting about that, though, is through DBT, which ended up really being more a trauma-informed care approach, when properly applied, people with borderline personality disorder could actually heal and no longer have borderline personality disorder. So once again, that's one of the claims that Chris kind of gets away with, saying that he cured himself of BPD with mindfulness, since actually that can happen, and that's part of what we do in the industry. It's just not what happened with him. So it's tricky. He's very, very, very tricky. And just overall, everything he's doing is just incredibly unethical, inhumane, at this point bordering on and potentially illegal. At the very least, it counts as slander. It counts as harassment, especially when you find ways to get cops sent to people's houses for welfare checks. Like, this is ugly. And I know he's going to hide under a rock until this all dies down, and then start doing this all over again. And even if he doesn't return to using other YouTubers as examples, he is going to still be preaching this very dangerous method, and skewing all of these very valid types of psychotherapy to sell his books and his classes and be your sole solution and cure. And it's all bullshit. So, yeah, I'll probably do a follow-up video on how you can get actual evidence-based care, about the kinds of things he talks about. Oftentimes these things are things that you can get from just about any therapist now. There's often a lot of free resources online that are provided by licensed professionals that are highly regarded by SAMHSA and other, oversight agencies for mental health. So there's no need to fall for his crap. So yeah, I just want to be clear. I think that all the videos people have done exposing him so far are absolutely amazing. And it helped me set the record straight for myself. But I just wanted to add kind of that context to back them up in terms of, what the profession actually says about this stuff. And that it's not what Chris is saying. What Chris is saying is not okay. And pretty much nothing he's doing right now is anything that any mental health professional would ever be allowed to do. And at this point, if he tried to get a job in the field, he wouldn't get the job because they Google us, they background check us, if they see any of that crap and the internet remembers, no, he wouldn't get hired. So at least that's a plus, but unfortunately that means he can just go out on his own and continue to try and prey on the vulnerable and just be a piece of crap. And yes, also, what he's doing is absolutely gaslighting. He is trying to turn it around, make himself look like the victim, outright calling people who are calling him out crazy to the extent that he's diagnosing them with crap. It is like gaslighting 101. And between his own personal history with addiction, growing up with a psychologist, and having some of the background he has professionally, it makes him extremely dangerous. So I hope maybe along the way some former Rewired soldiers can ditch him. I hope this video helps provide some credence to people who have spoken out about what he's been doing. And I'm happy to be a resource and answer any further questions about this. Once again, I'm glad to finally get this channel going, but this is sure not how I wanted to do it. So peace out, all you chronic advocates. If you found me helpful, please subscribe. This is going to be a collective channel with a lot of us with chronic illness, providing different perspectives on living with chronic illness and coping skills and all that good stuff. So please stay tuned. We will get to our regularly scheduled programming shortly. Thanks for watching.